Hello, all you intrepid adventurers of the interconnected interwebs, and welcome to the Average Game Enthusiast. I'm your host, the Average Video Game Enjoyer, and on this channel, I hope to be able to bring you just one more reason to be enthusiastic about the games we are discussing. With that in mind, today we are going to be diving headfirst into one of my all-time favorite game franchises, Five Nights at Freddy's, or as it's more commonly referred to because no one has the time to say that full name every time we talk about it, Fuhnaff. So, today I'm going to be creating my own version of the Fuhnaff timeline. With MatPat stepping down, it is time for the new generation of theorists to take up the mantle that he gifted us. So, I'm here to throw my proverbial hat into the theorist ring to try and give my own definitive answer to our favorite tangled up lore spaghetti. And to be honest, I'm really excited to share this video because I think in spite of all the memes about the amount of times this franchise has been solved, I really do think I have a version of events that, while still reliant on assumptions and some logical leaps, creates a pretty compelling story that ties together a lot of the dangling loose threads that have been tied and untied throughout the years. In fact, in this part, and in the next videos I'm planning on doing on this topic, because you know that every single FNAF timeline has to be a multi-parter. That's how you know it's good. I even get to give my own take on what I think might not be completely unique, but still pretty fresh take on the meaning of everyone's favorite lore minigame. That being, of course, the incredible and infuriating Midnight Motorist. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. So let's step back for a minute, shall we? I want us all to take a moment and set aside our own ideas, our headcanons, our personal theories, and all of that for a moment. That way you can stop and take a look at, this crazy idea that I'm presenting with more of an open mind. Because, trust me, this timeline isn't going to be 100% perfect, or completely supported by the evidence, or without its holes. But if you're willing to stick with me and take the ride and hang on through some of the logic bridges that I'm going to have to build over some of these gaps, then I think you'll come away with a story that is incredible, and that Scott started and now Steel Wool is continuing through. And so, with all that being said, that story is about a genius man whose arrogance and willingness to do whatever it takes would eventually lead to the destruction of everyone around him, including himself. So, to start off with, as a new theorist on the scene, I'm going to have to give you some of the groundwork of my ideas for certain things. Like, for example, the order of some of the more classic character deaths, motivations for characters like William, and some other, foundational info like that. To do so, I'm just going to get it done right up front, get your pitchforks and torches ready, because I think that in terms of the sort of classically debated deaths of Elizabeth, crying child, Charlie, and the missing kids, I think that the order of those deaths is Elizabeth first, then Charlotte Emily, then the crying child, and then the missing children. Now, that in and of itself isn't, the most unique thing in the entire world. Not very special. I'm sure there have been countless other theories by a ton of different people who have listed that as the death order. And I'm sure the immediate question that you are proposing in the comments or just shouting at whatever screen you're watching this on is, if Elizabeth dies first, why does William turn the Funtime animatronics into murder bots, right? That's always usually the biggest immediate objection to this sort of death timeline, with Elizabeth being the first child death. And that's the important point there, because I don't think that Elizabeth is the first person to die. I think she's the first child to die in that series of domino deaths, but I don't think she's the first person to actually die in the entire franchise. Instead, I think there is a death that happens before her, and it's a death that explains why William goes on his whole, murder spree, why he starts looking into Remnant, why he does, basically what he does. And it helps to tie in the whole put the family back together thing. And that death, as far as I can tell, is, of course, Mrs. Afton. Cue the dramatic music that I don't know how to edit into the video yet. So, anticlimactic reveals aside, I know what some of you are probably thinking. Is this going to be the game theory ultimate timeline all over again, where all of a sudden we get Mrs. Afton shoved into a position of a really vague character so that she can fill the gaps that we don't have a way to explain? And no, not really. I don't think so, at least. I think there's actually a pretty decent um, evidence base that you can jump off of, or at the very least that I'm jumping off of, to use her in this scenario. So, what evidence is that? What am I drawing on? Well, the answer is the security breach tapes, the therapy tapes, right? Um, and so the reason that that's a connection point in this is because I'm in the camp of theorists who believe that maybe not all of them, but specifically that therapy tape is the is supposed to be a parallel back to the Aftons, right? That Vanessa telling the therapist about the divorce that her parents had is actually a reference to Elizabeth's perspective of her parents' divorce, right? Of William and Mrs. Afton. And so, that being the case, we learn from those therapy tapes that the father in the case, William, used his daughter, Elizabeth, to give false testimony against William's wife, who is Mrs. Afton, to make her look bad in the court case. This, of course, would have had to mean that at this point in the timeline, when this divorce is happening, Elizabeth has to be alive, which means that if, as I said earlier, she's the first child to die, that means this divorce has to happen before any of the murders happen. Um, and so, yeah, and so, yeah, that's how that happens. And then we know it's also sorry, it's also part of the speculation of that same therapy tape that Mrs. Afton kills herself in the aftermath of that divorce because again, William makes her look bad. It's likely that she loses custody, and that's why William is sole proprietor of them. And then it's blurred out in the actual line of the therapy tape, but it's kind of heavily implied that the wife in question, Mrs. Afton, ends her own life in the aftermath of that court case, right? And so the and so again, the reason being that Elizabeth gives false testimony about her, which wrecks her life, and then she does that, and so it's that suicide, that death of his wife in the aftermath of this already painful divorce, that I think is what prompts William to start researching ways to bring people back to life, and what created this desire to put the family back together, right? Because it's the line in Fuhnaff 4, and it's the same sentiment that Michael echoes in his little monologue to William that, oh, I put her back together just like you asked me to, right? The idea of putting things back together in the familial Afton context is something that is associated with William. And so I think that this death of his wife is what starts that mantra. And so, in order to do that, William turns to turning the Funtime animatronics into the kidnapping murder bots that we all know and love. And that's his way of getting souls to perform experiments on in order to figure out how to, get everyone back together. So, that being said, I do have a little bit more of interpretive evidence as to why I think this, just kind of beyond the therapy tapes. One is the song that Ballora sings, who I think at this point Ballora is pretty well established to be the animatronic stand-in for Mrs. Afton. Like the table setup in Security Breach and just her aesthetic and everything about her is just obviously meant to parallel Mrs. Afton, I think. So like I don't think that's too controversial of a thing to just say in blanket statements, but I just wanted to clarify in case it needs clarification. But yeah, so the lines of the song that Ballora sings are as follows: "Why do you hide inside your walls when there is music in my halls? All I see is an empty room, no more joy, an empty tomb. It's so good to sing all day, to dance, to spin, to fly away." Now, why is that song supportive of my idea? Well, it's because I think that this song is Mrs. Afton's chronicle of her life up to that point. a sort of suicide note, if you will. It's her way of reflecting about everything that has happened. The first line: why do you hide inside your walls when there is music in my halls? This, I think, is the explanation of why the divorce happens. William, similar to how he does in the Silver Eyes novels, becomes obsessed with outcompeting Henry and being better than him, and devotes all this time and effort to the company to the to the extent that he becomes an absent father and an absent husband. And this is why Mrs. Afton is calling him to come out of the walls of his work, which had consumed his life, and to instead spend, time with the family. There's music in the halls, right? There's the kids, there's her, there's all this stuff going on. The next two lines: all I see is an empty room, no more joy, an empty tomb. This is her life after the divorce, right? William uses the false testimony to take away the kids. He becomes sole proprietor. And so she is left with no joy in her life, right? There's no more joy. Her kids leave her with nothing. They're but an empty room, right? She doesn't have the kids around her anymore, so it's just empty rooms of a house, right? She's alone now. Her husband is gone, her kids are gone. She's alone in this empty room, and she's facing an empty tomb. That being the reference to the fact that she's about to, end her own life. Um, and then the final line of "it's so good to sing all day, to dance, to spin, to fly away" is an explanation for why Ballora is what Ballora is, right? She was obviously she was created to be a ballerina, this dancing performer, because Mrs. Afton, as she sings, likes to dance. She likes to dance, to sing, and to fly away. Now, that is pretty speculative, obviously, and also very tragic, but I bring it up because I think that if you're willing to accept that interpretation, which it is an interpretation, right? It's sort of a take it or leave it interpretation of things. But if you're willing to run with that in conjunction with the therapy tapes, I think it lays out a really nice, clear narrative motivation reason for William to snap the way he does, right? Because it's made pretty clear across the variety of depictions of William's character that he was always kind of on the edge of crazy. Like, his obsessive worship slash jealousy of Henry from, again, the Silver Eyes novels is sort of the most obvious example of that. Like, it's just weird. And so that obsessive nature leading to a divorce would obviously spiral out of control. And I think that because it's also a major through line of William's character that again, the whole put his family back together thing, right? It's the main thing that's echoed multiple times throughout the games is, I will put you back together. I put her back together like you told me to, right? It's this theme with William. And so I also think that it's clear that William still loves his wife, like, because an objection might be that if William's wife divorced him, well then why would he want to go and revive her, right? Why would he want to bring her back if she inflicted this divorce wound on him, right? If she left him. Well, I think it's made clear that William still loves his wife even after the divorce, because we see in Security Breach when the Aftons are all recreated on that table scene, Mrs. Afton is in the place of honor, right? She's at the head of the table. She's included in the family dynamic. And as an aside, yes, I do think that William is the one who orders that table to be made. Like, I think he's obviously he's not the one who physically builds it, but I think it's sort of on his orders or whatever. And that is details for another day and another video once we get to that point in the timeline, because trust me, I will explain that yes, I do think William is still active in modern FNAF. But again, video for another day. Until then, just kind of go with it. But all that being said, I'll summarize by saying that it's my belief that due to William's obsessive work nature and the desperation to prove that he's better than Henry, led to him becoming a neglectful husband and father, leading his wife to divorce him. This backfires on his wife when William uses Elizabeth's devotion to him to give false testimony about Mrs. Afton in court. This is likely the cause of her losing custody of the kids, and ultimately amounts to her taking her own life in the aftermath. And in that aftermath, William then begins to spiral out of control, looking for ways to desperately bring back the wife he loved and to repair the family that is now broken. And so this results in the and what happens with the Funtime animatronics and Elizabeth's death and all of that happening. And that's sort of the jump start of the timeline. But before we get to that sort of more agreed section of the timeline where like we actually have events to point to in theory crafting, there's one or two really points that of discussion that I want to bring up that are sort of still more speculative but are pretty compelling and will have implications for now and a little bit later down the timeline. So those points are William. The first point is William. I don't think would have had to have seen any sort of animatronic possession or agony creations or anything like that to know that it's possible. And I'll break that down in a second. But the second point is that even though William is obviously the one who turns the Funtime animatronics into the murder bots, I think that it's Henry who actually builds them. Like, Henry builds them and then William modifies them into murder bots. And that probably sounds pretty strange. Both of those things probably sound pretty strange, but let's break them down one at a time. So, starting with the first one. The reason I bring up William's foreknowledge of possession in relation to the Funtime animatronics is because unlike the murders of, say, Charlie or the missing children's incident, which can be sort of implied to be just random acts of violence with no greater plan, right? Like, you can argue that when William killed Charlie, he didn't necessarily have to have a sort of master plan in place, right? It could have just been he was drunk, he was mad, he kills the kid. And, like, and that retroactively taught him that, oh, hey, Charlie's soul is possessing the puppet. That might be a thing that I can replicate, right? The Funtimes are instead sort of built with that experimenting mind sort of like inbuilt into them, right? There's their storage tanks, their luring abilities, and all those extra characteristics that they've been given really makes it clear that there was a lot of thought into them and that they have a specific end goal, right? It's not just murder, it's storage, it's luring, it's all of these different things. So that would imply that he's not just acting impulsively like he, again, might have been with some of the other murders. You could argue at least that some of the other murders might have just been impulse or alcohol influence. But the reason I don't think that that's a problem is because of one of the characters in the books, right? The reason I don't think this whole possession foreknowledge thing is an issue is because Dr. Phineas Taggart, who, for those unfamiliar, is one of the characters from the Fazbear Frights novel series, and he's the one who's responsible in that series for the creation of the Stitch Wraith and a lot of the important information that we have about, like, agony and haunted objects and different things like that. Now, don't get ahead of yourself and mistake what I'm saying. I'm not trying to say that William literally read Dr. Phineas Taggart's research papers. This is not what I'm trying to say. What I am trying to point out by including Phineas is that there are characters in the wider Fuhnaff universe who have done experiments with remnant, possession, and other such things like agony other than William, right? So this might mean, and obviously I'm arguing that it does mean, that William wouldn't necessarily had to have seen things like Circus Baby's eyes changing from blue to green to know that a soul can possess an animatronic. Nor would he have had to encounter things like the shadow animatronics to have knowledge about things like agony and the effects it can have, or dark remnant, or anything like that. And so, like, right? Like, he could have read about these things. Again, hypothetically, he could have read about these things from other researchers who did other experiments before he committed any murders. And so, if that's true, given William's obsessive and meticulous nature shown in pretty much all depictions of him, it's not unreasonable to assume that he would have died very deep into the research, allowing him to get all the pieces that he needs to, modify the Funtime animatronics. And he would have done that, of course, in the lead up to Circus Baby's Pizza World, which leads it nicely to the next point, which is the whole Henry being the one to build the Funtime animatronics, right? And so that point of Henry building the Funtimes didn't originally come from me. That's not a self-epiphany that I had. I don't get credit for that. Instead, I originally heard this idea posited by Rye Toast, who I'm sure many of you FNAF heads watching this video are aware of. And in his video titled, "I Was Wrong About the FNAF Timeline," Rye Toast brings up the quote from Henry in FNAF 6, which, quote, Small souls trapped in prisons of my making, now set to new purpose and used in ways I never thought imaginable. Rye Toast then proposes that this line could be in reference to the Funtime animatronics, and I agree. I'll link to Rye Toast's video in the description below if you want to watch his discussion on it. I would recommend it, and because that video and most of his FNAF videos are just really, really good. And if you want to skip straight to where that quote is, the timestamp is 9 minutes and 53 seconds. But I'm going to go a little bit further into this idea than Rye Toast does, like into the details of it than Rye Toast does. Because I don't really agree with this idea, but I think I might have found another piece of evidence to support it. You see, when I first heard Rye Toast mention Henry's line and its connection to the Fun Times, it made me go back and remember and look back at a lot of the, not a lot, but some of the voice lines in Sister Location, specifically from Circus Baby. And I realized that one of her monologues in particular, in my opinion, lines up really well with this way of thinking. Once again, for those who need a refresher, which I honestly kind of hope is all of you, because I hope that, unlike me, you can't just quote like 80 to 90% of this franchise's voice lines off the top of your head, because if you do, you probably need to find better uses of your time. Similar to me and all the other FNAF theorists, but that's okay. Jokes aside, in Sister Location, while we're inside of the Circus Gallery control room, there are sections where you have to hide under the desk to avoid the Biddy Babs, who come to attack you. While you're down there, Circus Baby herself will talk to you. And I do think it's worth pointing out that it is specifically Circus Baby, not Elizabeth Soul. There are several reasons I think this, and why it's important. One reason I think that Circus Baby the robot is speaking rather than Elizabeth is that Michael isn't recognized by Baby when she meets him. Rather, she says, quote, "I don't recognize you, you are new," end quote. If Elizabeth was the one in control, you'd think she would either A, know that it's Michael and react to her older brother, or B, think that, and Elizabeth does react to him. We know that in Pizzeria Simulator, we know that Elizabeth does react to him. After the jump scare, Elizabeth calls out the fact that she recognizes Michael. She knows who he is. And so it'd be weird for her, not to do that here when she sees him. Or B, it would be strange that if she doesn't recognize Michael, like if she just doesn't know who it is, we know that Mike looks like William. And the other to the extent that the other robots think that Michael is William. And so you would think that Elizabeth would at the very least recognize that and be excited to see her father because she's so loyal to him. But as I just pointed out, Baby very plainly says that she doesn't recognize Michael at all. This alongside the evidence of Baby referring directly to Elizabeth as separate from both her in the Ennard boss fight and in the dialogue that I'm about to show you from the Under the Desk sections tells me that Baby's AI and Elizabeth's soul are both at play inside Circus Baby until Night 5, when we remove the chip inside Circus Baby, which she tells us is her. If you want more details about the whole Circus Baby's AI acting on its own theory, I suggest you go down to the link in the description and check out Mr. John Fuhnaff's video titled I Solved FNAF's Security Breach Ruin and I Solved FNAF Help Wanted 2, because he does a much, much more in-depth and well-rounded review of it than I do. However, for this timeline video, I want to focus not on Elizabeth herself, but rather on Henry versus William's programming inside of Baby. Because, like I said earlier, I think that William modified Baby. And so I'm trying to find evidence for the two programs acting inside of her. And I think I might have found it. Because I think that Baby herself gives us direct evidence of these two separate programs operating inside of her during her talk with Michael under the desk. So I'm going to play this audio quote for you guys so that you can hear it in its full context. It is a bit of a longer one, so bear with me, but I think it's important to play the full clip in the context so that you can really get the full understanding of Baby's self-expressed confusion over her actions during the day that she's on stage, And the key point being that Elizabeth, or not Elizabeth, that Baby doesn't understand why she does some of the things she does on that day, or even that she is kidnapping slash killing Elizabeth when it happens. Credit to the YouTube channel Father, whose silent walkthrough I'm using to show this audio clip. His link will be in the description as well. Now, as I get myself resized so that you can see the video, I think it's worth pointing out once again that Baby is just confused, which kind of feels weird when you're listening to the audio in the context of the game. But going back to it now with more context of the story's events, it makes a lot more sense. And I just want to zero in the fact that she's confused and she's asking, sort of rhetorically for clarification. And see if you can catch why I think there's two programs. See if you can catch it in this clip.
I would always count the children. I'm not sure why. I was always acutely aware of how many there were in the room with me. 2, then 3, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 2, then none. They usually played together in groups of 2 or 3. I was covered in glitter. I smelled like birthday cake. There were 2, then 3, then 5, then 4. I can do something special. Did you know that? I can make ice cream. Although I only did it once. There were 4, then 3, then 2, then 1. Something happened when there was 1. A little girl standing by herself. I was no longer myself, and I stopped singing. My stomach opened, and there was ice cream. I couldn't move, at least, not until she stepped closer. There was screaming for a moment, but only for a moment. Then other children rushed in again, but they couldn't hear her over the sounds of their own excitement. I still hear her sometimes. Why did that happen?
You see what I mean? Baby is confused as to what even happened in that moment. Um, she doesn't understand why she's keeping track of the children. She doesn't understand why she sort of loses control of herself when she switches from performance mode to, hey, there's a lone child in the room, switch to kidnap mode, right? She doesn't understand A, that the switch has even happened, or B, why it happened. And I think that this is probably the clearest cut evidence of the whole two programs inside of her. Because she literally switches from doing normal animatronic things that you would expect from one of Henry's animatronics to, oh crap, all of a sudden some hidden trigger has been activated and now all of a sudden she literally says I was not myself, and she isn't possessed at this point. Elizabeth isn't dead yet, so how can she not be herself when Elizabeth is alone with her? Well, it's a reference to the fact that her base programming that Henry gives her is being taken over by William's kidnapped child program. um, and the program that the program that I think both of them are stored inside the chip, or at least this is the part that's a little strange, is like if they're both in the same chip, because we remove a chip from Baby at the end of night 5, and I'm about to show you the clip where we do that, and her telling you that she is the clip and that we put it inside of hand unit. But it's a little strange because it's like she, right, there's these two programs that's inside of her, and I don't know if we remove both or if we just remove one and we leave the other one behind. That's something that I'm still thinking about and will come up later in the modern FNAF videos, because I think that, as I'm going to get to here in a minute, that Baby's AI is going to play a very big role in modern FNAF. But again, getting ahead of myself. So I'm just going to show you the clip where we remove the chip that has at the very least the baseline programming that Henry gave her, might also contain William's alterations to the code. Not 100% sure. But either way, we remove it during night 5, and again, credit to Father for the clip that I'm about to show you. His silent playthrough made this a lot easier to put together because I didn't have to try and mess around with audio files or go back and play Sister Location myself. So thank you very much to him. So let me get this.
There is a passcode that you must enter before you can retrieve me.
Retriever.
Enter the code carefully. 9, 1, 5, 5, 1, 2, 9, 5, 7, 5. Good. A hatch should have opened. Take the card that you find inside. Now you must turn back. I will guide you through Funtime Auditorium so you can reach the scooping room. When you are there, I want you to destroy this body. Put the card into your handheld device, and I can continue to speak to you. Now, press the green button to your left. This will send me to the scooping room.
Right? Baby tells us to put the card in our handheld device and that card is her, right? She tells us to retrieve her. We get the card, we put it in our handheld device, hand unit, and then it kind of disappears from there. Like, we don't actually know what happens to hand unit itself after the events of Sister Location. Like, we have no idea. However, we do see that in Help Wanted 2, that in the first aid minigame, right, where we're taking care of Helpy and doing all those weird simulation trainings while fending off the pizzeria simulator animatronic coming at us through the vents, right? In that minigame, there looks to be this same chip that we just saw from Baby inside of Helpy's brain. It looks pretty much the exact same. And there's also a drawing in the background of that minigame where we see Helpy escaping what appears, or what would be assumed to be the FNAF 6 fire, which might help explain how this chip lasted after FNAF 6, because it throws away the idea that you can just write it off as, oh, the fire happened, so it doesn't even matter that this survived Sister Location. Yes, it does, because Helpy, who has the chip inside his head, escaped that fire according to the drawing. So that could explain how Baby's AI was able to survive for this long. Now, once again, Mr. John FNAF, who is a lot of the inspiration for this part of the theory, talks about this as well in his video. So again, if you want a sort of more hyper-focused review of these sorts of ideas, go watch his video, I Solved FNAF Help Wanted 2. But real quick, I pulled up the images from that video just to show you really quick, so that you know the contrast, right? Like, you can see here very obviously the chip from Sister Location, the chip that we put inside of Helpy. I mean, it's literally the exact same thing, which is interesting. And then the photo, we got Helpy, we've got the burning building in the background. He's running away. That's how the chip survives, right? That's how it gets to where it is right now. So that's all obviously really interesting, but to, once again, summarize all of this info dump, I believe that the existence of characters like Dr. Phineas Taggart provides possible explanation for William learning about Remnant and Possession much earlier in the timeline and before he commits any murders. This, I believe, leads him to modify the new Funtime animatronics that were built by Henry, turning them into killbots, which results in the confusion inside of Circus Baby. Baby, following William's programming, kills Elizabeth when left alone with her. Years later, Baby talks Michael into removing her AI chip, placing it inside of Hand Unit, where it is later transferred, likely by Fazbear Entertainment, into Helpy, who, after escaping the FNAF 6 fire, has his programs uploaded into the VR games created by Fazbear, possibly setting up the return of this Circus Baby AI as it's villain. I'm assuming she's going to be the next villain, honestly. So there you go. But again, discussion around Circus Baby's later implications further down the timeline, we'll have to wait for further down the timeline. So for now, I just want you all to sort of store that last part in your minds as a lore piece that will come up later. But I'm going to wrap up this section of the timeline of the Afton's divorce, Mrs. Afton's death, William's spiral, learning about all the Remnant stuff, modifying the fun times and getting his daughter killed, we're going to wrap up with Elizabeth's death and the aftermath that will lead us into my next video. Because at this point, as I've said, William's use of the fun time backfires because it gets his own kid killed. So Elizabeth dies inside Circus Baby. William covers up her death and shuts down Circus Babies in one fell swoop by filing a missing persons report for Elizabeth and giving a false statement of gas leaks to the public as an excuse for the closing down of the planned restaurant. And as one final aside before I end out, I thought it would be fun to mention that it's always kind of been my personal headcanon that the reason Elizabeth is able to get alone with Circus Baby, like the way that she gets away from William, who was so determined to keep her out of Circus Baby's grip, was because of what we hear in the opening of the sister location game. We hear what sounds like William giving an interview. It's where the voice lines of like the guy asking William about the strange features of the Funtime animatronics. William gives the blanket list of what she can do, and then it ends out with those aren't the features we were curious about, Mr. Afton, right? It's that whole line. And it's like, that's always been, to me, in my personal headcanon, while that's happening, that's when Elizabeth sneaks away and gets to Circus Baby. So, it doesn't really matter either way, because we know her death happens, but I just thought it might be a little fun, a little headcanon nugget for all you Faz heads who have been watching to the end of this rambling theory video. So, but regardless, by the time that William has lost his wife, and now his daughter, because of his actions, this causes him to just dip into a worse mental state than ever before. It's at this point that I think that he starts to go to bars like Junior's and abusing alcohol, as his failure to keep Elizabeth safe would certainly have eaten away at the man who had believed that he was on the cusp of unlocking the secret to restoring his broken family. So, this part of the timeline closes on William having lost his daughter to Circus Baby, and one final question remains to William as we leave him here. That question being, what does he do with the body? After all, he filed a missing persons report for Elizabeth, so he couldn't exactly just hold a funeral and be done with it. So, what does he do? Well, I think that Midnight Motorist might just give us the answer. That answer being in the form of that strange unmarked earth pile that can be found in a clearing near the Afton's house. I think that William buried his daughter there, close enough that he could keep an eye on the grave, but far enough away that visitors to their house, Junior's, or anything else in that general area would have a tougher time just stumbling upon the grave by accident, right? And so it's there, laboring under the weight of his daughter's death, that we leave William and the timeline for today. I hope you enjoyed hearing my speculations about the events of this amazing franchise, and if you did, be sure to like the video, drop me a comment on your personal theories, on what your personal theories are, or what you think about my take on the timeline, and finally, remember to subscribe and turn on all notifications, that way you're notified when my next part for the timeline is up for the watching. I honestly don't know when that will be, because between school, work, church responsibilities, and just other life stuff, I don't know when I'm actually going to be able to get time to finish the script for the next series. I have all the info right up here in the old Faz head, but actually writing it down in a way that can be enjoyably communicated through a video like this, I don't know when I'm going to be able to do that. So whenever I'm able to do that, you'll feel free to watch if you liked this one, and that's why you should turn on all notifications and subscribe, so that whenever it does happen, you'll be the first to know. Also, feel free to check me out on Twitch at The Average Video Game Enjoyer. Link will also be in the description. If you want to see me play and talk about some games other than FNAF, I'm playing Palworld right now, so if you're interested in that, feel free to give it a watch. Again, I don't know when I'm going to be able to do that, but if you feel like it, go ahead. But with all that being said, I want to say thank you all again so much for watching. I hope that you have a God-blessed day, and I will see you all in the next video. Until then, this is The Average Game Enthusiast. I am The Average Video Game Enjoyer, your host, signing off. Bye-bye!